Well, hello, and thank you for joining us on today's Ask the Mayor program. Today we have a continuation of the program from Savannah that we recorded in Savannah at Georgia Municipal Association. And today is part 2 of that 3-part series. So stay with us on Ask the Mayor.
Hi, my name is Patty Ellis, and My City TV is full of information.
During this drought, we need everyone's help. Please make water conservation a way of life. Visit northgeorgiawater.org for more information. Thank you.
Far-reaching and dramatic changes to our current tax system were proposed during the last legislative session we just heard about. Fortunately, for those of us who live in Georgia and in our cities, most of these bills did fail to become law. The Georgia Municipal Association recommends the formation of a blue ribbon task force to review the state tax code in its entirety before any changes are made to our current tax system. The question to the panel is, what are your thoughts about tax changes recommended during the last session of the General Assembly? And I think I probably know what the answer is going to be, but more importantly, what do you think should happen during the next session of the General Assembly with respect to GMA's recommendation? And we'll just...
Well, of course, I've already made note that I thought the tax reform as proposed was practical. And I will borrow just a few words from the mayor and city manager of Gainesville in saying that what the approach was a one-size-fits-all. We've got more than 500 cities across the state of Georgia, and one size just doesn't fit all. I will say that I agree with GMA that with a blue ribbon task force, and I would go further to say a blue ribbon task force with non-partisan persons, a non-partisan task force think tank that would not have any political agenda. I think if I was in charge, I would appoint that nonpartisan think tank of the best and brightest in the state of Georgia. And I would make certain that none of the members of that think tank of the best and brightest would have any political agenda. And then I would go on to the rest of your question to say that in the 2009 legislative session, if I was in charge, I would not allow for any tax reform measure in the 2009 General Assembly. I would have that blue ribbon task force, nonpartisan think tank, best and brightest, to spend the rest of this year and all of 2009 putting together a comprehensive tax reform plan that they could travel the state of Georgia and share with cities and counties and share with citizens across the state of Georgia, have hearings 2008 and through 2009, and I would charge them with bringing back a comprehensive tax reform plan that we could have in the Georgia General Assembly in 2010. That would be what I would do if I was in charge. And so that's what I would share with you on that.
Other comments from our panelists?
Well, I'm going to be as nonpartisan as Donna Brazil was yesterday. And suggest to you that that might be a good idea, but it ain't going to happen, because the General Assembly is going to decide what we're going to do with taxes, and it is a partisan group. Obviously, there's Democrats, there's Republicans, there's House, there's Senate. And so we're going to sit down and try to figure this out. I mean, I've got some differences in Chip. We all do, that's fine. But somehow we need to get together and figure it out. And it's not necessarily brain surgery. I'm not against the Blue Ribbon Commission looking at it, but you know, when we talk about our sales tax, at the same time that we're saying let's increase it, let's flatten it, and get rid of property tax, we every year put a new exemption on for something on sales tax. I've been in the General Assembly 16 years, and we sales tax exemption on Girl Scout cookies, sales tax exemption on blueberries,
firecrackers.
No, we didn't sales tax exempt those. Those are still taxed. You gave me a good idea. But some states, Florida being one, 20 years ago, got rid of property tax, and they went to a sales tax on services. And within 6 months, they got rid of it. A couple years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, maybe, Michigan went to a sales tax on services. And within a short period of time, repealed it. And there's a reason those states went there and went away from it. Let me give you one example. There's a big company on North Avenue that sells this stuff called Coca-Cola. They have $1 billion a year that they pay legal services. Can you imagine that? $1 billion a year in legal services. Now, if I start doing sales tax on services, they just had a $40 million tax increase on their legal services. Now, when they told that to me being a CPA, I said, no, you didn't. They said, no, we did. I said, no, you didn't. So why do you say, no, we didn't? I said, you're going to do your legal services, not in Atlanta. You're going to do it in Charlotte, North Carolina. You're going to do it in Birmingham, Alabama. You're just going to move your legal services someplace else. Now that takes care of Coca-Cola's problem. But what did that do to Austin and Byrne or King or Spalding, who had the $1 billion in revenue from legal services? So we got to look at the full ramifications and the ripple effect on everything out there. Now, the reason the Speaker went after property tax is it's the most hated tax. Now, I would argue with you in a maybe a perverted manner, that's a good reason to keep it. Because you raise my property taxes too high, and I'm going to vote you out of office. Exactly right. I mean, it's hated so much, maybe it's good to have it, because we're going to watch it a little closer. We don't want it to go up so much. The Fulton County folks that raised these companies 1,000%, those companies are going to leave Fulton County, or those Fulton County commissioners are going to get voted out of office. So we need to look at the whole thing. I don't know. I'm not against having a Blue Ribbon Commission, but I don't know that we need one. Eric Johnson mentioned the other day, and I don't necessarily disagree with him, but you'll probably see something coming back in this next session that's probably very close to the car tax, trying to get rid of the car tax. But that doesn't solve the whole problem of reinventing the whole tax system, which is what we really need to do.
Anyone else?
I think Senator Balfour pointed it out. What actually occurs, whether we like it or not, is that the market takes care of all these problems. I think we ought to have a tax system, as the mayor pointed out, that gives complete flexibility to the local government. I don't know why we, to be honest with you, cap what you can collect in the sales tax. You keep jacking the sales tax up high enough, and guess what? People won't buy in your city or your county anymore. I know a few years ago when Cobb County was at 5%, if I had a large ticket item, with all due respect to my mayor over here, I would drive the 3 miles from my house in Cherokee County across the line into Cobb County and pay a 5% sales tax, because it was worth it to me if I'm going to buy a $2,000, $3,000 item. So the market's going to take care of this. As Senator Balfour pointed out, in Fulton County, I can guarantee you those businesses that just got hit with a 1,000% property tax increase are saying, oh, wait a minute, maybe I need to move across the line into Forsyth County or to Cherokee County, and of course we'll welcome them with open arms, but the market will take care of those problems. So as we look at the tax system, regardless of what we do, people are going to make decisions based on tax consequences. So we ought to have a tax system that has the least impact on their lives, and one that to a certain degree is almost voluntary, and that's why I'm a supporter of the consumption tax. Now, I would agree with Senator Balfour, if you take the consumption tax and put it across all services, you are going to drive some services out of the state of Georgia, or they're going to look elsewhere. They may not, depending on what it is. But sometimes we look at this consumption tax and we say, well, it's 4% in the state right now, let's just add all these services to it. Well, what if we added the services to it and dropped it to 2.5%? I think a lot of people would probably go with that if it was bringing in the same amount of money. But every economist, we talk about blue ribbon panels, just about every economist will tell you that if you're going to have a consumption tax, it ought to be flat and it ought to limit the exemptions. We shouldn't be going through the tax code every single year and finding this exemption, and this exemption, and this exemption. Yet we do that because they all sound like a good idea and they all placate some constituency out there. So I think we ought to have a flat, fair, transparent tax system. We don't have that with the Georgia income tax right now. It's relatively flat. I'm not so sure it's fair or transparent. We certainly don't have it with the property tax. And the consumption tax does provide a flat, fair, easy to understand, transparent system. So I do think we need to move in that direction. But whether we have a blue ribbon panel or not, let's take good ideas from anybody. I mean, that's what we're there for, is to listen to good ideas. And as we went through the process of the Great Plan last year, we found out some bad ideas. The idea of taking the money into the state and then promising redistribution is not a good idea. What's a better idea is to find out exactly how much money is coming into the state, where it's coming from, and making sure that it goes back to that locality, dollar for dollar, and that the state's not involved in anything other than making sure that the money gets back to where it came from. So we're going to continue to work on taxes. The system we have right now is broken. It is unfair. It is non-competitive with many of the states around us, particularly Florida. So we've got to look at that because in addition to having a fair, flat, transparent tax system, we have to have one that in some way encourages economic growth. And I think you do that by having a system that's easy for people to understand and for businesses to thrive with. So we'll continue to work on that because it is one of the dominant issues that the General Assembly faces on a yearly basis.
Nikki, I think one of the reasons that we are advocating a Blue Ribbon Commission or Study Commission, what have you, is last session there was so much misinformation distributed by proponents of the Great Plan or what have you that it really confused the issue. A commission would give credibility to the information and analysis that's conducted on whatever type of change we're talking about. And that's one of the things that would give some value to a study commission, rather than this advocate or that advocate that has a particular agenda in mind. Let's get accurate information out there. Let's really talk about what cities truly are spending for services in their community, not some made-up number that really doesn't fairly represent the challenges that cities, counties, and school systems have in funding their services. So that's one of the hopes that I would have, that if we look at this issue holistically, fairly, and thoughtfully, that we'll get good information, and then from that information we can make good, sound tax policy for our state.
Yes, I will. First of all, I do want to give credit to the Senate for being led by a great Lieutenant Governor and letting cooler heads prevail in this whole issue. I thank you, gentlemen. I think the membership recognizes that fact. I think a blue ribbon panel, or whatever you want to call it, a task force, whatever, allows cooler heads and brighter minds to prevail. They don't put cute names on things like your birthday tax, property tax. Tell them what it is. It's 3 teachers' salary. It's your police force. It's your water system. It's all the services that we provide. That's the funding mechanism in a lot of localities. So when you get up and you get real cute with all your acronyms and things that you want to attach to it, it's a good political selling point, but it's not real practical. And then, as Don said, you come back to states like Florida and Michigan, where they've had those systems changed, they don't like them after the fact. They probably pulled the trigger too fast. My opinion is if they had never thought of this in California, I don't know why or how we came up with it in Georgia. And the last thing I want to say about the tax on services, Don made the point about Coke paying the taxes on a huge legal bill. The funny thing about that, some of those lawyers over in the House managed to cap the amount of legal fees that you pay those taxes on. It just happens they're all tassel-loafer lawyers themselves. So, and if we're going to do things, let's do it evenly. Let's have it public. Let's vet it. Let's make sure everybody has adequate information, because you are completely going to change the way Georgia is. And the other thing we need to realize is we're not Florida. You know, we're not a vacation destination. We're in the Tourism Development Committee today. And 60 million people pass through Georgia every year and don't stop anywhere. They're destination bound to Florida. We ought to try to capture some of that, but they're down there spending their money in hotels and motels and buying souvenirs and going to amusement parks. In Georgia, working people are working to provide service, manufacture products, build a quality of life. A lot of them are doing it in cities. We're not Florida. We're not Michigan or California. We are unique, and we don't need, again, to layer a one-size-fits-all approach to our problems. And that's what a blue ribbon task force would do, or a commission appointed, bipartisan, industry, elected officials, public servants, all of those folks, put them in the mix and come up with a plan. And that plan may very well say, you know, you've got a great variety here. And as long as you got local control, things work okay. And I would argue also that we do have property tax caps, and it's called the voters. Every 2 years they go in our cities and they pull a lever. And they can cap property taxes real quick, and they can roll them back if they choose to.
Well, those are all good comments, and I know as a moderator I should not interject any personal situations in the discussion, but I know as we were discussing consumptive tax during the last session, two things were very prominent in our community. And that was that out-of-state property owners would not pay any property tax, of course, if it's eliminated. And rarely would they consume goods and services in the community. So some felt out-of-state property owners basically would get a free ride if that was the situation. The other thing that came up in our county and city, which may be consistent with others, is the reduction in school tax for seniors. The voters voted that in, and of course if you're over, I believe it's 65 years old, you don't pay the school tax, which is the largest component of the three components of property tax, which is municipal, county, and school tax. So essentially seniors would have started paying a consumptive tax that they otherwise would not have paid in sales tax. So those are just two things that came up there. In yesterday's panel discussion, the issue of our failing infrastructure came up, and that is a situation around the state of Georgia. And the need to fix problems was discussed in some detail. One panelist yesterday indicated that cities should not look upstream or up the food chain, as it was said, for solutions to these problems. And I think most of our elected officials who are here today will agree with that. But what we're doing is merely seeking to maintain our current revenue streams, not looking upstream for additional revenue. And for the General Assembly to provide us with tools to actually provide our own solutions to the infrastructure problems that we have. My question is, as an organization, how can we best accomplish the goal of maintaining current revenue streams while seeking additional options and tools for our organization?
Would you repeat the last part of that question?
Okay. It is how, as an organization, how would GMA cities maintain the current revenue stream that we have and give us the ability to provide options for additional revenue streams. For example, how are we going to keep our taxes from being reduced or eliminated, and how can we have additional revenue if the voters would approve that? Of course, the first thing that comes to mind is a most tax. And so we as cities are struggling with all these new proposals that come up that would, and a lot of them would eliminate current revenue. Franchise fees is one that comes to mind first. So if these are basically eliminated, income stream has to come from somewhere. So how do we as cities continue, and the General Assembly members, continue to provide those services, maintain that income stream, and also provide options for additional income to operate our cities and provide for that failing infrastructure? It's a tough challenge. It's a tough question.
I think the base premise is to leave cities alone. Quit trying to come in and say, I've got a pet project, I'm going to do away with franchise fees. I'm going to reform taxes. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Everybody seems to have an issue, and what they don't realize is they are eroding our capability of providing those services. It makes me think back to the late 70s, early 80s, when New York was almost bankrupt. You know, you can choke something to death. They've got to understand in the General Assembly and in the Congress that when things are passed down, we're usually where the buck stops. And our pools, our resources seem to be drying up. I don't understand the reticence against allowing us the opportunity to put a most on our ballot. If our folks are willing to pay, and if they want to pay to reduce property taxes, if they want to use it for transportation purposes, recreation, or any combination thereof, if those people are willing to put the tax on themselves to augment our revenue stream or to cut property taxes, they ought to be given that right to do it.
I'm not sure New York City is a good example. New York City had a 9.75% sales tax. That's one reason they were going bankrupt, because people were going across the river to buy everything. They were leaving because their taxes were too high. They also were spending more money there. I don't think New York City's problem of going bankrupt had anything to do with Albany, New York. I think it had to do with New York City.
Let me interject. I didn't mean that was necessarily the cause. I meant it was the attitude of a large amount of the population, both the state of New York and the country as a whole at the time, that they didn't seem to care. But these are the engines that run the state. It's where most of the sales tax is generated. We provide an overwhelming amount of the services, and a large part of the population lives there.
Well, it doesn't matter what the people of New York State think. New York City had a local option sales tax that was point of sale that was 9.75%, and they were still going bankrupt. Still a bad example. It doesn't matter what the people of New York think about New York City. New York City was going bankrupt because they were spending more money than they brought in, and their tax structure was so high that people could drive across a bridge and get their clothing with no sales tax. Now tell me, if you can drive 5 miles and buy your clothes with no sales tax, or you can pay 9.75% sales tax, and oh, by the way, at the time, gasoline was probably 50 cents a gallon, where are you going to go buy your kids clothes for school? It did not have to do with most. It did not have to do with point of sale. It didn't have to do with New York City and New York State, or the people of the United States hating New York City. It had to do with New York City having a tax system that was way out of bounds. But that's, let me get back to Georgia. You heard the President Pro Tem, I think, say yesterday that maybe a local option sales tax with a point of sale system, attaching that to the card tax is maybe the way to go. I'm not sure if that's the final answer. You know, anytime you do a point of sale is going to, all of a sudden, you got one major opponent to you automatically, and that's the counties. And counties don't want point of sale. You know, so all of a sudden, you've got a major competitor, and then you've got a fight in the General Assembly between counties and cities, and well, maybe we need that fight and figure out who wins and go from there. But that's a huge issue between, you know, counties and cities is point of sale.
I'll jump in on that one. I worked with Senator Pearson a couple years ago and introduced the point of sale bill. To me, it's just, and I know it makes some of my counties mad, but it's just about information. And if you can't have good information, you can't make proper public policy decisions. And that's what frustrates me about not wanting the point of sale, because it's almost a message of, we don't want to really know what this is, because if the fact were to get out, it might scare us. And look, the county can make the argument, and it's a valid argument, that of course the commercial activity is going to occur inside of the city. And that is a valid argument. But let's make the argument based on what are the facts. And the facts are that we need to know where the revenue is derived. And it gets back to what we talked about earlier with the Blue Ribbon panel. You know, if we're going to study this issue, well, we need the data to study. And so when we always stop this point of sale technology from being used, I just, in the back of my mind, I think there's something more to this that meets the eye, because this is just simply data that is necessary for making good public policy decisions. And I think we ought to move forward with it. We tried it a couple years ago. We moved the ball a little bit, hit a stone wall, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try it again. And once we have the point of sale technology, we can make better decisions. We can also know where that money that is being collected by the state and being distributed out, whether that's done in a proper manner. I mean, it is mind-boggling that in 2008, that you can have a 1-cent sales tax, 3 1-cent sales tax applied to the exact same transactions and come up with a different figure. And that's what our Department of Revenue tells us. That shouldn't happen in 2008. In 1975, yes. I've got a study committee, and you're all welcome to join it tomorrow if you're still going to be here. And that's one of the things we're looking at, is the privatization of sales tax collections. I love the state of Alabama, but for goodness sakes, if they can do it, we can certainly do it here. And it gives the cities another option on who collects their taxes. And lo and behold, when the private industry did it, guess what? More sales taxes got collected. And you know, when we talk about lowering taxes, which everybody in this room is supportive of, we can do that if we collect the taxes that are supposed to be paid to begin with. Because as we all know, there's a lot of people out there that owe these sales taxes and are not paying them, because right now the system is they can get away with it. You don't have to electronically report until you get over $5,000. That number ought to be lowered down to $1,000. We have got to move this tax collection system into the 21st century. Point of sale, electronic reporting is got to be almost mandatory. I understand there's still some mom and pop places that can't do it, but we've got to have information to make proper public policy decisions. And we may disagree on what the right route to go is, but we should never have to disagree on what the actual data is. And so that's what we need to work on in the General Assembly this year, is making sure we have the data to make the right decisions.